Hi Chefeteers, I'm Chef Nakia and I want you to be more confident in the kitchen. And today we're talking about how to cook outside of the confines of a recipe. So maybe you are somebody who has been cooking for decades and you feel super confident in the kitchen already, and it's probably been 5 years since you last read through a recipe. Or maybe you are somebody who is feeling pretty good with where you're at in the kitchen now, and you're really curious to have a little bit more flexibility and like creative control when you're cooking. And so you're looking to maybe start stepping outside of the boundaries of that recipe. Well, today I'm going to share with you kind of the process you should go through, whether you're brand new to this or you just want a little bit of a process to follow, and you can plot in there maybe what you've already been doing, see how well it lines. But this process is meant to help you all to not feel stuck in a recipe, to not feel like every time you want to cook, or even most of the times you want to cook, that you need to pull out a cookbook, search on Pinterest, or go to my website to get a recipe. Feeling confident cooking without a recipe can help you really let your creativity shine. It can help you create food that hits your flavor and texture preferences to the max, and it can help you find more ways to reduce your at-home food waste because you have more flexibility to use up what you have on hand that might be spoiling soon. So stick around and we are going to learn how to cook without a recipe. The first thing that you need to do is take a favorite foods inventory. And I do have a little short video about this that I will link below. But very briefly, a favorite foods inventory, it can be written, it can also be something that you know in your mind, but if this is something that you aren't as familiar with, I'd recommend at least writing some stuff down. You are going to write down your favorite ingredients, the favorite meals you've ever had, your favorite dishes, your favorite ways to cook specific ingredients or dishes. You're going to write down the types of flavor combinations you like best. And you can even put in like overall favorite textures. So some examples of this could be, oh, I like sweet and spicy together. Or I tend to like things on the more sour side, like I gravitate towards more sour flavors. I like my vegetables cooked really thoroughly so they're soft, some may even say mushy. Or I like my bread extra crispy. I tend to go for crunchy foods over maybe like chewy foods. These are just a few examples, and whatever you like is totally fine. There's no judgment or anything. Like, you don't have to try to come up with the most nuanced flavor pairings or what you feel like might be like the most interesting textural components of a dish or anything. Just try to kind of brain dump what are some of your favorite things that you've ever eaten, that you've ever cooked. And then once you have it brain dumped, then you will probably see some of these patterns start to pop up. So you might not really know off the top of your head, like, what flavor combinations do I tend to go for? But after writing down a list of your favorite foods, you might see these patterns start to emerge. Now, why is this important? Before we can change a recipe or cook without a recipe, we need to know our end goal. And to figure out our end goal, we need to know what we enjoy eating the most. So we're planning the end right now so that we have somewhere to target, so that as we are making adjustments, we're making them in ways that support our overall flavor and texture preferences. And this is an ongoing journey. So this favorite foods inventory is probably going to change over time. and you can keep it saved as a digital document or a written document, or like I said, once you get pretty familiar with the way that you like things cooked and some of your favorite foods, like you'll just have it all up here. And the second thing that you will want to do is understand what you can and cannot change. So for the rest of this video, I'm really going to focus the most on culinary side, like savory side of food, because baking is much more involved when it comes to what you can and cannot change, and like understanding all of the food science and ingredient interactions that go into that. Of course, some of that does apply to savory food too. It's just that in baking, we have so many chemical ingredient interactions happening, and a lot of times it all comes together in the oven, and you don't know that you did something wrong until it's almost too late. Whereas with savory food, a lot of times you can taste as you go, and you might be able to save your food, or, adjust your food along the way. Both baking and cooking have a lot of science involved in them and a lot of art. A lot of people say baking is a science, cooking is an art. They're both science and art. And I'm not going to make you go get a food science degree in order to understand all of these ingredient interactions, but I will go over a few basic ones to keep in mind that should help steer you towards being able to answer for yourself, can I substitute this for that? Or can I change the cooking method? Or can I just ignore what the recipe says and do it the way I want to do it? With baking, one of the top things to not mess with is the mixing method. If a recipe calls out a specific mixing method for a specific type of food, keep that mixing method, because there are a lot of reasons why it's the right mixing method for your final product. And with that, I will move along to savory food. Okay, so let's start with marinades. A lot of times we will marinate our meats in order to add flavor to the meat before cooking, along with breaking down the connective tissue in the muscle. So like lean meats or tougher meats, you will sometimes hear about the marbling of the fat, and it is true, the marbling of the fat does help whenever it cooks. It becomes a lot more tender and juicy, but a lot of the toughness that you might feel in a meat is because of the connective tissue. And so marinades can help break down and soften some of that connective tissue. One of the main ways it does that is through acid. So if you are marinating a meat with the goal of making it more tender when you cook it, you don't want to take the acid out of the marinade. And if it calls for like white wine vinegar, you could replace it with apple cider vinegar. That's fine. Just be sure to replace the one acid with another acid in order to get a more tender meat. Another note with marinades is the salt and the seasoning are both going to be pretty important. So you can adjust the types of seasonings that you're using and the amount when it comes to like herbs and spices, but you're gonna want to keep the salt up pretty much right where the recipe recommends. And then with oil or other like liquid flavoring ingredients, you don't want to reduce it so much that your meat doesn't have a chance to be submerged in the liquid. So there's a good amount that you can adjust and change within marinades as far as swapping out ingredients that have flavors that you prefer. However, keep the acid in there if you want tender meat, and don't mess with the salt too much. Something that a lot of times you can mess with pretty freely is the size in which you cut your vegetables. And just know that the size that you cut the vegetable will absolutely impact the rate at which it cooks and the type of texture it will have whenever it is done cooking. So let's go back to our favorite foods inventory. Are you somebody who loves very well done, soft vegetables? Do you like vegetables that are more al dente or almost even crunchy in the middle, even after they're cooked? Do you like them somewhere in the middle? Do you like vegetables where you still get a good amount of like fresh flavor from them, or do you kind of try to hide the vegetable flavor with other stuff? And I'm sure that there are going to be different vegetables that you feel slightly different about. The size of the vegetable in conjunction with the type of cooking method, especially like the amount of heat that you are directing at that vegetable will have an effect on how cooked they get. So if you like your vegetables much more cooked, much more on that soft side, you can cut them smaller, and then you'll actually cook them at a lower heat for longer time. And if you like for your vegetable to kind of have a texture difference throughout, so whether it's kind of crispy on the outside and soft in the middle, or still a little crunchy in the middle but a little soft on the outside, that's when you're going to keep them larger. That way there's more size there for there to be a textural difference. And then you'll cook at a higher heat for a shorter period of time. And of course, it depends on the vegetable as to what the specifics of that time and temperature are. Also, roasting your vegetables in the oven or sauteing them in hot oil is going to promote more of that texture variability. So like maybe a little bit more done on the outside and a little less done in the middle. And something like steaming your vegetables is going to create a softer, more even texture throughout vegetable. And whenever you are looking at substituting different vegetables for each other, you can group your vegetables, by like the type, the overall family that they fall into. And a lot of times you can very easily like substitute one for another within a family. Like you're probably not going to have to do too much different prep or cooking in order to just swap those in and out. Whereas whenever you take a vegetable from one family and substitute it for a vegetable from a different family, you might need to change the cut size, change the cooking method, or the time and temperature that you are cooking it at. So what are these like vegetable families? So cruciferous veggies is an example of a vegetable family. So this includes asparagus and broccoli and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts. These vegetables that when you look at them, they have little like crosses on their florets. So the cruciferous veggies also includes like cabbage. And then there's like the squash and gourd family, right? So it's like swapping in a summer squash for zucchini is pretty easy. But note with this family, swapping in a butternut squash or an acorn squash for zucchini will probably require a longer cooking time because that zucchini has a lot more moisture, right? There's a lot more water in that plant than like a butternut squash. That texture is pretty different. So just be sure to keep that in mind too, even if you are substituting within the same family. If the texture or like the water content is significantly different, then you may also need to adjust your cooking time, cut size, etc. And then we have like the legume and pea family. So like snap peas, sugar peas, sweet peas. And then you have peppers, and you can have like sweet, like red bell pepper, yellow pepper, green bell pepper, and you have spicy like poblano peppers, and of course up from there like habaneros and jalapenos and ghost peppers and all kinds like that. And then you also have the nightshade family, which are going to be ingredients like tomatoes and eggplant. And these also are like very typically water-loving, water-hungry plants. When you want to start substituting ingredients in for each other, you can start by using ingredients within the same family, and then as you become more familiar with cooking different ingredients, you can, make other adjustments to go even further outside the box and substitute veggies from other families in. This kitty's excited about that, apparently. So now we're kind of in the weeds here with ingredients. So let's back up just a little bit and get more into like cooking processes. Okay, so when we have a recipe, you know, usually the first chunk of the recipe is the different ingredients. And so by swapping out ingredients that you have on hand, you may be able to reduce your food waste, at-home food waste. And if you like certain flavors better than others, then you get to experience more of that certain flavor in your meal. So that's exciting. Now, whenever we go down to like the method of preparation part of the recipe, a lot of times you can have a lot of fun within this space, but it is really important that you remember the time it will take to cook whatever foods you are preparing. One of the worst things is whenever you are cooking a meal and half of it is ready to go and you're still waiting on the other half of it to finish cooking, and so now what was ready earlier is getting cold or losing some of its ideal texture, and you're feeling anxious because this isn't done yet and how quickly is it going to get done. So whenever you are adjusting recipes or cooking outside of a recipe, just be sure to quickly plan through, okay, what are all of the components of this meal? Is there anything that needs to be done first before it can be added to another part that then needs to cook? And how long will each of these things take to cook? Just to make sure that you get the longest cooking time items to the heat, on the grill, on the fire, whatever it is, first. That way everything can come together and be ready to eat at the same time. So this is one way in which that method of preparation that you usually see in a recipe oftentimes guides you. And so if you are not going to cook within the confines of a recipe, just be sure to take a minute or two to kind of look into the future and make sure that you set yourself up for success there. Along with that, be sure to keep in mind food safety and food safety requirements from making sure that all of your meat has time to get up to its safe internal temperature when you are cooking it, and meat and fish. Making sure that potentially hazardous foods aren't sitting out for longer than 2 hours. That way there isn't that risk of growing things that can end up giving you food poisoning. So if you are not using that recipe, just remember that, just make sure that however you are handling your food does not create a risk for foodborne illness. And this section is already longer than I had planned it to be, and it's because I love food science so much. I love talking about the way that different ingredients interact, and I've been told before that people don't care. People in general don't care. So if that's not true, please comment below and let me know that you're interested in learning more about how ingredients interact. And if there are any specific ones that you want to learn about, definitely let me know, because I want to share about this more if people are interested, but I also don't want to create a bunch of videos that you guys don't really want to know much about. So that is my ask of you today. Please, if you do want to learn more about specific ingredient interactions and how to create a foundation of this knowledge for yourself, that way you can confidently cook outside of a recipe most days of the week, let me know below. Thank you. So once you understand what you can change and what you cannot change, and this is going to be kind of a library that you're constantly growing, the third thing to think about is getting really familiar with the different cooking methods. I've kind of referenced this already, but understanding how you prefer your vegetables cooked or your meats cooked or your fish cooked. Like, what kind of textures are you looking for? What kind of flavors do you like imparting? Will a lot of times point you towards a certain cooking method that creates that texture or allows you to enhance it with flavors in a certain way. And if there's a couple different ways in which you can prepare foods to be like a flavor and texture that you enjoy, then you can also think about, okay, what's easiest for me to do? What has the least cleanup, maybe? So definitely think about what cooking methods you are already super confident with and which ones you enjoy utilizing for certain meals or ingredients. And then you can also look at, okay, what cooking methods am I maybe not as familiar with, and maybe I want to try them out, because as I've said, different cooking methods are going to result in, different textures and or flavors within your foods. So in general, there's like dry cooking methods, wet cooking methods, and then cooking methods with oil or fat. Dry cooking methods include things like baking, which baking stuff is very similar to roasting stuff in the sense that it's in the oven, but baking stuff goes through the 13-step baking process, whereas roasting stuff is just like applying the hot air around the food to cook it. And then there's grilling, which is heat down below, heat and or fire down below, and the food on a grate above. And then broiling is, think of it like upside down grilling, right? So the heat is coming directly from above onto the product. Griddling is having a hot surface that your food is touching. So if you think about like a flat top grill at a diner, picture that when you picture griddle. So with dry heat cooking methods, a lot of times you have a lot of control over like the seasonings that you may toss a food in, and they'll stick to that food and they're not really going to go anywhere. Also, you can dry out your food in a sense, but it doesn't mean that every dry heat cooking method is going to create dry food, right? It's great for like melting cheese onto bread, or roasting like asparagus in the oven. That bread isn't gonna get super duper dry, and that asparagus is still gonna have, moisture and a nice crunch to it. Wet cooking methods or moist heat cooking methods, for the most part, happen on the stove top. So this is poaching, simmering, boiling, and even steaming. Steaming is almost like conjunction, like dry heat and moist heat, because with steaming, you have the water down here and the food on top, and so the steam is cooking the food. So it is a moist heat cooking process, but the food itself is not like submerged in the water. Poaching, a lot of times you talk about this with eggs and fish. It's a much more gentle heating, so whenever you have foods that are more fragile, you want to poach them. Poaching is water that's around 160 to 175-ish degrees. As you all know, I love talking about high altitude cooking and the differences between low altitude and high altitude, and one of the big ones is the temperature at which water boils. So as I go on to the next two, simmering and boiling, the temperatures that I share, you're gonna be like, those seem like big ranges, and it is because of altitude. At sea level, water boils at 212 degrees, and as you go up in altitude, the water will boil at lower and lower temperatures. So here where I am in Colorado, we're about 204, 205 degrees. There are other places in this state where it is like 200 degrees. So because of the atmospheric pressure, reducing the boiling temperature, etc. I have other videos about high altitude, I'll link. We are going to be talking in pretty big ranges when we're talking about moist heat cooking. All right, so simmering is whenever you have little bubbles and you don't have to worry too much about it being super gentle food, but you also don't want that water like all the way up to 205 to 212 degrees at a full boil. And you're going to boil things like pasta and potatoes, things like that, where you don't really want to elongate the time that you're cooking pasta because the pasta can end up getting like kind of gummy. So you want it to cook as quickly as possible in boiling water. And then the last one is braising, and braising is usually a two-step cooking method, so you don't braise your meat for the entire time. This is used more often in like restaurants, catering places than at home. It's used whenever you're going to be cooking like, 80, 90 pounds of meat, like enough meat for like 200 people, 150, 200 people. And so you need time on your side. That's what braising is. Braising will typically be used in conjunction with another type of cooking method. Like a lot of times it's pan frying, and then you finish it by braising it to give yourself a little bit more time. The braising step also does add a lot of good flavor, and it can help, especially, so you do it the most often with meat, especially like red meat. And so you can start cooking it, and then you can kind of slowly finish cooking it without drying it out by actually submerging it in some moisture, and flavorful moisture especially, to help that meat end up being super juicy once it's served. With the cooking with fat, the oil and fat based cooking, this is like frying. So sauteing is using just a little bit of oil in a pan with pretty high heat, and that will cook your food. Pan frying is using a ½ inch to an inch or so of oil in your pan, and you will flip the food as it cooks. And then deep frying, you want to make sure that oil is nice and hot, or else your food will just absorb a lot of oil as it's cooking. The goal with deep frying is that the oil is really hot, and you drop the food in, and it transfers a bunch of heat into your food, cooking it thoroughly, but also creating that nice crispy crust on the outside. We don't want the food to absorb as much oil as we can. We want it to get more heat than it does oil. So getting more familiar with these cooking methods and the types of foods that you might typically cook with them, and the way that it's going to change your finished product, is really important to being able to cook without a recipe, because you can see a certain protein and think about how you want it, like the texture that you want it to be, or the way that you want to add flavor to it, and you choose the cooking method that gets this to that in the best way for you. And whenever you are familiar with how these cooking methods work, like the typical process, then you don't need a recipe to tell you step 1, step 2, step 3. You just say like, oh yeah, I know how to pan fry scallops. And number 4, taste as you go, and then taste it again, and taste it again, and taste it again. Especially when you are working outside the confines of a recipe, you want to season your food to be the most flavorful for your preferences. And this is the nice thing with cooking and with savory food, is typically there are many steps along the way with which you can put a little spoon in and taste it, or, if it's like a seasoning blend or something like that, get a little bit on your finger and taste it. And kind of see, okay, this is a little bit too peppery, so I'm gonna add some other spices to, balance it a little bit. Or, oh, I wanted to add oregano to this, but I can barely taste it, so I'm gonna add even more. Tasting as you go allows you to intervene with your dish and make it the best, absolute best possible. And going right back to that favorite foods inventory, if you taste something, it might not be super glaring of this absolutely needs more salt. You might just taste it and say this just isn't, it's missing something. It's not bland, but I kind of want something more there. You can go back to your favorite foods inventory and kind of look at what are some of my favorite flavors, and that might clue you in and put you in the right direction of what maybe you need to add. So maybe you really like sour flavors, and so maybe you can just add a little bit of vinegar or some lemon zest or a squeeze of lemon juice, and that will take, you know, whatever the sauce or whatever it was that you were tasting, that will like take it to the next level, and you'll be like, ooh, okay, this, now it's really coming out at me. Or maybe you tend to like spicy, and so just adding, you know, a little bit more spice to it, whether that goes with like a fresh diced pepper or seasonings like chipotle or cayenne or chili powder. You can add a little bit, and then that might be enough where you say like, oh, okay, there it is. Now I know what it was missing. So those are the steps I recommend to starting and or like further pushing yourself into experimenting with cooking without a recipe. You know, break free of the confines of a recipe and do what you want, because it aligns with your flavor and texture preferences, right? Always consider flavor and building flavor and incorporating the flavors that you love the most. Also incorporating the flavor combinations and pairings that really excite you. Keep food safety in mind and the timing of how long it will take things to cook, and ensuring that everything, you know, comes together and is ready at the same time. That way you can eat your meal as one. All right, get familiar with your cooking methods and ingredient interactions. I mean, definitely go get a food science degree if you would like to. If it sounds like something you are kind of interested in, but you definitely don't want a degree, but maybe you just want a few more tips here and there, let me know in the comments and I'll share that with you. But by knowing the cooking methods and different ingredient interactions, you can make substitutions with confidence, and you can choose the best cooking method for your desired outcome. And if you have any other questions about this, please feel free to ask in the comments. I am putting up new videos every other Wednesday and posting a fair amount of YouTube shorts, so follow along to gain more confidence in the kitchen. And definitely let me know if you love cooking outside of recipes, if this video has inspired you to start cooking outside of a recipe, or if maybe you're still in the space where like, I want something written and telling me exactly what to do in front of me. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. But if you are looking to expand your creativity in the kitchen, feeling confident, like stepping further and further away from someone else's recipe and kind of creating one for yourself on the fly, can be really fun and challenge you. And sometimes you will create the most memorable and delicious meals out of it. Totally understand that it can feel intimidating, because at the end of the day, like, we want to be able to eat the meal that we have worked hard to make. Like, we want it to be edible, we want it to be delicious, and food ain't free. So if we're spending money on groceries and bringing it home and spending the time cooking it, we definitely want to enjoy it. But by keeping these steps in mind, and this process in mind, I have full confidence that you will be able to create a meal for yourself without a recipe that you absolutely love. Thank you so much, Chefeteers. We'll talk again soon.